You are listening to the official podcast of the Mutual UFO Network.
Welcome once again to the official MUFON podcast. I'm Richard Beckwith. What happens when one of the world's most accomplished scientists turns his focus to one of its greatest and most forbidden mysteries? Dr. Garry Nolan is a distinguished professor in the Department of Pathology at Stanford University's School of Medicine. His day job is revolutionizing our understanding of cancer and the immune system. He's developed innovative instruments and technologies, leading to over 350 research articles, 50 U.S. patents, and the founding of numerous multi-million-dollar companies. Stanford has even honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. But Dr. Nolan is also driven by a question that has captivated humanity for centuries. Are we alone in the universe? As we all know, his interest in this subject isn't purely academic. As a young boy, delivering newspapers, he saw an object pass silently and inexplicably right over his head, an experience that personally convinced him that there was truly something to investigate. Applying the same scientific rigor that made him a leader in his field, Dr. Nolan investigates what he calls the data off the curve, the unexplained anomalies where he believes true discoveries are made. He was approached by representatives from the CIA to analyze the mysterious medical injuries of pilots and diplomats, cases that included the first individuals we now know as Havana Syndrome patients, as well as a small subset who claimed to have experienced harm from UAP encounters. He has analyzed alleged UAP materials, publishing the world's first peer-reviewed paper on the subject and finding evidence of industrial processes and anomalous isotope ratios that defy easy explanation. To professionalize the study of this phenomenon and move it beyond its ridicule, Dr. Nolan co-founded the Sol Foundation, a think tank bringing together top minds from academia, government, and science to tackle these profound questions head-on. He is a scientist who believes in data, not dogma. He is a pioneer who argues that stopping people from asking questions is what is truly unscientific. Today we have the great honor of speaking with the man who stands at the intersection of groundbreaking science and the ultimate unknown. Dr. Garry Nolan, welcome to the MUFON podcast.
Thank you very much. Been looking forward to this all week.
I've been looking forward to it for a really long time. I've been wanting to have a discussion with you about as much as we can learn about what you've learned about the subject of UAP and NHI. And our audience, a good portion of it is a nuts and bolts kind of audience, but we're also very familiar with the notion that the Earth is of some interest to non-human intelligences, that perhaps these NHI, if you will, have been here for a very long time. And so the question comes about, are we being visited, as it were, by aliens, as some of our nuts and bolts folks would see it, or is this something that is much deeper, that goes to the evolution of our planet, perhaps even the evolution of our species?
Right. So I think we need to take it back a step as to differentiating and learning to differentiate what our personal beliefs and personal conclusions are about the entire matter of NHI versus, at least for me, what is scientifically credible and or provable. I think your audience especially is extremely well educated on these matters. But at least from my point of view, I probably won't be telling them anything they don't know. But this is more about how I've been approaching the matter as a scientist, and how I've been approaching the matter through, say, the Soul Organization or other relationships that I have with many of the other the cottage industry of organizations that exist now. I mean, MUFON, of course, being one of the oldest and as well beyond a cottage. I think, as I stated at one point on Alex Klokus's at his investment meeting, where I said, what do I think is the chance that aliens are here? What percentage would I give? My answer was 100%, as a personal belief, not as a fact. So the only way that I can think about that is, what have I seen, and what all fits together into a package that makes sense? Because humans are always looking to find a way to tell a story. Or at least organize information as a story. So the only way that I can make sense of it is that whatever this is, given the what's the right way of saying it? Given, let's say, the technology that it seems to represent, the manners in which humans are allegedly interacted with, bespeaks of something which is at least thousands of years beyond us, if not millions of years beyond us. And if you take a further step back, as others have started to do, in a universe that is 14 billion years old, the chance that other civilizations might have arisen that are well in advance of our own is high, right? And given the fact that we're already starting to see evidence of, let's say, the remains of what might be something biological on Mars. I think it's the Perseverance lander has been seeing that. Yes. What we think might be going on around the moons of Jupiter and Uranus. So whatever it is, certainly had the opportunity to get here. Even given conventional rocket speeds, given 1 billion years, you can be all over the galaxy, at 10,000 miles an hour by the simple von Neumann approach. So we can definitely dispense with the question of, can they be here? Yes, they can be here. And yes, if they are here, they're obviously well in advance of our technology. The next question is, who and what is here? What is their purpose relative to humanity, if any? Are we their purpose? My feelings is that they started on the other side of the galaxy several hundred million years ago, and they're here now. They didn't get here just to find humanity. They got here and humanity arose while they were doing whatever it is that they were doing. Now, part of your question sort of subsumes the underlying question of, well, if they are here, how are they interacting with us? Are they here to help us? Are they here to hinder? Are they here to change us, for some other agenda? I don't know. And I don't think we'll frankly ever know, at least in our lifetimes. So,
is it possible? Is it possible, Dr. Nolan, that we are not simply talking about one civilization, but perhaps many different civilizations on many different levels of technology that have an interest in our planet for one reason or another?
Yes, and I said this before. I think that there seems to be data and speculation or evidence, insofar as evidence is a hypothesis and not proof of anything, that whatever these things are, they might be in tension with each other. You hear lots of stories around this, and just as you relayed, if there is some kind of hierarchy of intelligences with different capabilities, it's not as if they all sit around some council table somewhere and come to an agreement, like the United Nations. I can't even imagine.
Or the Federation.
Or the Federation, or what have you. That there are likely, if anything, multiple agendas, and I don't think we're the focus of any of them, of any of them really. And I think, at best, we're somebody's side project, or we're, not in the way, but they're going about their business, and to the extent that they interact with us, it's everything from, just interested in what we're doing to maybe stopping us from walking off a cliff that they can foresee that we yet can't.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about a field that we have in common, which is biology and genetics and molecular biology. When I was in school many, many years ago, I worked in a molecular virology lab, and we were working to isolate a protein in tobacco plants called P68, which had some relationship, to our understanding at that time, to the human immune system. But we were attempting to extract and isolate the protein from tobacco plants. And so what I'm asking you now about is highly conserved sequences.
Was that for like some overexpression vector?
I can't answer that question. I haven't been involved in the.
Was it tobacco mosaic virus that you were using?
I cannot recall. It's been. I got my degree in 1990. And so it's been quite some time. I just remember the lab that I was in, and we were running gels, to isolate.
Yep.
We would tag the protein.
And this was a human protein?
No, this was a tobacco protein. But
it was a tobacco protein.
Yeah, but it had a human analog.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and so what I'm asking you about here is highly conserved sequences and the potential of panspermia and the possibility that we may be related genetically on some fundamental level to virtually every living thing in the known universe, just by virtue of the fact that we have this DNA in our cells that somehow allows us to arise from just basic simple chemicals. So is it possible that we may have sequences in our own genes that we have that would be in common with other species in the universe?
Yeah, I mean, so again, let's go back to the beginning. What were the first atoms that arose after the Big Bang? Hydrogen. Obviously. But then carbon, nitrogen, oxygen,
phosphorus,
sulfur, up through magnesium. Those are the first things that arose. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen is essentially 90%, 99% of what humans are made of. So the seeds of what was possible, whether they had become complex organic molecules yet, were available almost at the very first formation of a sun that went supernova. So, carbon, nitrogen, and all the heavy metals. So everything that could be seeded was available. It was the first things that were available are what we're made of. So what that means is, as soon as life could happen, that the possibility was there for it to occur. And you might actually have multiple different domains of organic hereditary lines that, you might have one line that happened in one part of the Big Bang after that, those galaxies expanded, another in another line, so that we're not all necessarily related, but we all are, at least if we're organic, at the level of carbon, nitrogen, et cetera. So the sequences of something on the far side of the other universe might be very different from us, but still are made of the same constituents. So there might be local domains of organic, hereditarily related materials. And, there's this fascinating paper that came out talking about the Moore's law of genetic complexity, where they were basically positing that over evolutionary time, there were increases in genetic complexity. For instance, the Cambrian explosion, or the Cambrian evolutionary explosion of all the various forms, happened because the modules that create different tissues and capabilities all suddenly had reached a level of Lego complexity that they could be put together in many different ways. And so this complexity doubled over, I don't know, some tens of millions of years each time. And this was all speculation, but if you look at the complexity of what mammalian and all the upper life forms that we know now, and then you go back to the lower and lower life forms and the complexity of genetics, you end up creating a line that actually goes back and crosses the 0 point at around 9 billion years ago. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because what that is speculative evidence that whatever we came from arose 9 billion years ago. So it's to your point.
Yeah.
So the counterpoint to that is that complexity doesn't double in a linear fashion, but that the complexity on Earth perhaps arose exponentially and then what started going linear. So, this 9 billion year crossover point is if you just assume linearity. But if suddenly complexity arose and then went quickly and then became linear, then you don't have evidence of panspermia per se. But when I try to explain this to some of my lay friends, is look, everything you're made of, and especially all the metals that you're wearing, say, as jewelry, etc., came from the heart of an exploded star that became gas and then recondensed as dust, which then condensed into planets that then arose and in a way, or the planets then allowed for the arisal of life. So if it took that long for all of this, there's plenty of time to imagine that life could have hitchhiked on some of these rocks along the way, even if it was extremely primitive. So my expectation is that if we were to look around at least our local, if we had the opportunity to look at the local star clusters around us, and if there was life there, it would be somehow similarly related to us if panspermia acted. But you might go to, let's say, the Andromeda galaxy and find that, in fact, there's a whole different lineage of at least carbon-based life forms. So, I think it's just a fascinating thing to think about. I mean, I can't wait for somebody to please land a lander on one of the moons of Jupiter or the other planets that have frozen oceans underneath, and please scoop up some of that snow and put it in melt the snow, add maybe a touch of organics, and see if anything starts swimming around.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the interior of Europa. And perhaps the interior of Io, where there may be a vast ocean that's powered by the central volcanic forces inside of the planets and the movement around Jupiter. I would think that there might be some really fascinating life forms in those oceans that are a little more difficult to access than the surface of another moon without sending probes in.
I've seen some papers and proposals for how to find that. And one of them, it was fascinating. I don't know if I could ever find it again. Involved sending something with a nuclear heated core.
Yeah.
That would, on the way down, drop off transponders and leave the transponders there. So, because you're probably unlikely to get fiber optics to follow you the mile or so into the ice that you need to go.
Right.
And then hopefully then that drops into actual water underneath, and I would hope to see some stuff maybe swimming around. But
they might be able to get some stuff from the surface. I guess there's some sort of subsurface extrusion on occasion out onto the surface.
I would certainly imagine that. Yeah, didn't they have some water jets that they've seen?
Yeah, I think there's actually a couple of. Actually, I'm not sure what body I'm thinking of, but there are a couple of pretty prominent jets coming out of it. But I want to get back to our discussion about conserved sequences and DNA, and so certainly the basic constituents of life: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and some of the other important enzyme cofactors, if you will, were there from the beginning of time. And so what is the commonality of DNA, or what would you think that the commonality of DNA throughout the universe would be, or the use of DNA as a way to replicate? It seems to me that's a highly efficient way to maintain memory over a long period of time and to be used as a replication mechanism. So what would be the possibility that DNA is an analog across the universe, or something akin to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, the open-handed question is, the chirality of the DNA and the chirality of the proteins.
And explain that for our audience. It has to do with the orientation of the molecules, right? One is a left and one is a right, and so there may be.
Yeah. In chemistry, as you know, it's called chirality, or in lay speak, it's often called mirror life. I mean, there's actually an argument ongoing in the scientific community as to whether or not we dare even try to make mirror life. I mean, it's within our capability now to do it. And the worry, of course, is it would become the equivalent of the gray sludge self-replicating nanites. So it'd be something that we wouldn't be able to
stop,
deal with and stop. So stop research into it now. I think whether there are alternative ways to encode information, I mean, sure, there's you could still use nucleotides and have a different code, I suspect. But interestingly, as others have shown, the code is almost perfectly aligned with its function. So whether that was, let's say, whether that was just a function of evolution and selection that imposed efficiency on the system, or whether that was designed, as some people would say. There's a paper out there called the wow signal in DNA, which posits that the code was designed. And they go through a lot of interesting mathematical arguments, but I have no way to validate it. I think it's a very interesting question. But it once you establish a code in any life form, like the early life form, it's hard to go back and rewrite it. So you sort of get stuck with what you got. It's kind of a founder. It's called in the ecosystem world, in ecology, it's called the founder effect. Mm-hmm. That once you establish with a certain formalism of how the genes are talking to each other, it's not easy to go back and rewrite the code. You can mess with the code a little bit, and Nobel Prizes are given fairly regularly around, at least in the early days, around how you the information flow from DNA to RNA to protein. When they found that actually RNA could go back to DNA, that was David Baltimore and Howard Temin won the Nobel for that. And actually David, who was my postdoc mentor, just recently passed away. He was a giant in the field of open-minded thinking. So, I do think we have to be aware of that. It crosses over into a conversation that I see quite a bit online about whether there's any evidence that human DNA was tampered with. And there's some supposed paper out that I looked at the data and what they were saying. And I'm like, well, so far that's not convincing. Please put it into a peer-reviewed format. And then let's have the conversation.
Is this about the Big Bang of the brain kind of a thing, or the fact that because I see quantum speciation as something that takes place over periods of time where you go along with the species for a while, and then all of a sudden it advances very quickly, but it just has to do perhaps with a series of mutations or something of that nature, right?
Yeah, I think I think if there's a sudden leap in capability. Because of, DNA rearranges, all the time, and mistakes are made all the time. And if suddenly that leads to let's call it a technical leap in the genetic capabilities, then that species is going to rapidly fill all of the niches. So I don't see that sudden change as being indicative of intervention. It could be. It's evidence for it, but it's not proof of it. So you always need to keep it on the table. But when there are sufficient alternative explanations, I don't think we should go down too many rabbit holes. I think people are welcome to do whatever they want to do to prove it. Science, and Nobel Prizes are given, on the basis of people pursuing a truth that they thought was real, and it becomes evident that it had importance well beyond just the simple problem they were asking. And that's the basis of which the Nobels are given. The one that was given yesterday, actually, I know one of the guys, the guy who was out hiking, and he didn't find out that he got the Nobel. Until he got back into radio range or cell phone range. And actually, I was just texting with him last night, and he said, I haven't gotten 300 emails in an entire year, never mind a day. So, it was well deserved for what he got. Actually, it was on the immune system that he and two others shared the prize.
That's wonderful. As we talk about this, I'm drawn to another subject, which I kind of gave you a little bit of warning I might want to talk about, which is the notion of biocentrism. And it seems to me, and so you may be familiar with Dr. Robert Lanza's theory that he shares with a couple of other folks, that our universe and the environment in which we live appears to be sort of fine-tuned to life. And that the reason for that is that because there can't be a universe without life. That life is essential to the existence of the universe because the universe must be observed. And so we start talking about quantum wave function collapse and all these things, right. But it leads to this question about whether life is essential to the universe and what consciousness is. How do we all right. do we all share some piece of it? Are we like the shard of a hologram, each and every one of us with the one consciousness? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, over a decade ago, I had this conversation with Hal Puthoff about what's the what's the minimal unit of consciousness sufficient to create an observable event that collapses the wave function? And he said, that's a great question. We don't know. And this was actually, it was a meeting that, a bunch of us regularly had every 6 months or so, that where Eric Davis had been putting forward the notion that the universe started when the first particles became quantum entangled. And once they became quantum entangled, that was essentially, and the recognition of that was essentially the start of the universe. And it was the seed that, created what it was. It was an interesting idea. And it was, I'm probably completely destroying what it was that Eric was trying to say. But that is what led me to what you just mentioned, sort of in parallel, thinking about, is the universe designed for us, or is the universe created because the fundamental particles that finally found their way to exist out of the nothingness of reality formalized into a universe that had the rules, right down at the Planck level for how particles would interact, that allowed for life to form? Because when you think about what each of these particles are doing, they're almost like little pieces of software and units of interaction.
Yes.
So it's very easy to take a step back and say the universe is a computer, because the rules, of these objects that are really just nothingness and waveforms look like the most advanced computer program you could ever imagine. I mean, at least that's the way I think about it.
Wouldn't you agree that virtually everything that we know, when you break it down to its most basic components, the subatomic particles and so forth, that everything in our existence can be reduced essentially to a computation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which gives rise to the notion of, do we live in a simulation, or is there are we living in a simulation?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't like that. I mean, personally, I just don't like that term as a simulation. And a simulation of what? Whether we're a simulation implies that you're not real, as opposed to saying that reality is a computer program that allows for us to exist. I mean, call it what you want, but a simulation of what? It's a very flippant term in my mind. And so, a simulation of something, a simulation of somebody else's reality, or a subset of somebody else's reality.
I understand. I think some people would say, that we're fundamentally we have a soul, that we are in fact conscious eternal beings, that we aren't necessarily defined by the physical bodies we find ourselves in, and that the simulation is essentially a way for the eternal portion of us to experience the passage of time, all those other things that we don't experience as eternal souls. That's almost a religious sort of a perspective. But what do you think about that?
I'm sorry, please repeat that.
Yeah. That I was just wondering, some people look at it like we are eternal. Each of us have an eternal soul.
Right.
And I think some of the evidence bears that out, that there is something, non-corporeal about us, that continues over a period of time. And it may be that the simulation, that we are in fact the designers of the simulation ourselves, so that we have something to do.
Yeah. I mean, to say that we have souls implies one of two. I'd like to think that we do, but implies one of two things: that our current reality, as we understand it, with the particles, et cetera, that we talk about, to the extent that we understand it at all, are sufficient to explain how consciousness might continue after death. And there's plenty of near-death experience, relayed stories. I believe that the people who say that happened feel that it happened to them. I don't know if it's real, or you basically say that our reality is a subset of something greater, and that the soul sits outside at the periphery in some other level of reality. And I think there's plenty of people who think that that's what's going on, or believe that they have had interactions with something in that other space. Now, somebody listening might say, well, that's crazy. Well, my counter to that usually is, okay, well, are you religious? Do you believe where's heaven and where's hell? Even as long ago as 2,000 years or whatever, we believed in other realities that were outside of the mortal realm. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's food for thought, certainly. And at least religions used it as a means of consequence.
Right.
That if you don't do the right thing, you won't go to the right place afterwards.
Right. Let's talk about consciousness relative to the NHI issue. Now, I can tell you from my own experience with an individual that I know that went to a crash site. And this individual went down into the crash, into the crater. He was actually a security guy, but was allowed down into the crater. Just probably not the wisest thing, but he was allowed down in there to just take a look at it. It was a large craft that had crashed in an area in the southwest. I won't say precisely where it was, but he touched the craft, and he said that he immediately got a feeling like the craft was talking to him, and it said, "You shouldn't be here." And so it scared the holy hell out of him, and he got up out of there because he sensed that the craft itself was alive and conscious and speaking to him. Have you heard of this phenomenon?
I've heard of this kind of thing. There's two possibilities there. One, the craft is truly conscious. So then you have to figure out, okay, how does metal or whatever is within the construction of the object become conscious? Where is the seat of the consciousness in that craft?
Yeah.
If such an idea is real, or is the craft, you could say, is the craft a super advanced AI? I mean, these days we're having a hard time even knowing whether or not ChatGPT or Grok is conscious. So imagine a civilization which is, again, 1 million years or even 10,000 years ahead of us. Look, imagine where we're going to be in 10,000 years. We could probably create a craft that is, for all intents and purposes, intelligent enough to seem like it's conscious. Right. I mean, so it's to me, the essential question is consciousness some fundamental feature of the organization of the brain, or can it be embodied in other kinds of complex structures?
That begs the question clearly about what the nature of consciousness is. But to me, it seems that consciousness on a certain level involves the possibility of two minds communicating without necessarily using a language, a telepathy,
right.
If
right.
you will. I was fortunate enough to become very close to a colleague of Dr. Puthoff's, a guy by the name of Dr. Stanislav Ojak, who was also a good friend of Ingo Swann's, and he was involved in all those Psi experiments at SRI many years ago, and what what fascinated me about that and about consciousness is it seems to me that there is an ability for consciousness to extend beyond the confines of the mind. And so I'm not, I mean, you know as well as I do that no one's been able to absolutely prove that, but that there does seem to be a high correlation between, a high correlation of people being able to, perhaps tell what a card is going to be before it's overturned.
Right.
There is some evidence there to indicate that we do have some component of our minds that extends beyond its physical confines. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I have no problem with that. I mean, we're sitting in as we just discussed, a complex substrate of reality down at a level below which we can't even perceive, the gluons and et cetera, the particles of reality. And time, we don't even fully understand. And so to imagine that your brain is not seeing, or your consciousness is not seeing an instant of time, but is seeing a space on either side of time. It's both seeing a little bit into the past and a little bit into the future. So you can imagine, say, a bell curve of how far into the future any individual can see, and whether that's just a minute or whether that's just a second or longer. I don't know what the answer is, but it doesn't bother me to think that our perceptions and how we think of it as an instantaneous moment might actually be a small window.
Mm-hmm. You've identified a neural structure in the brain that seems to be common among folks who have higher levels of intuition. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that to our audience?
Sure. So the suborgan of the brain within which this structure was seen or found is called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia is an ancient structure. It goes back evolutionarily to, way back to when mammals first began. I'm assuming that reptiles also have it, but I haven't ever actually looked into that. But it's an area of the brain that originally actually in science, back in the 90s and early 2000s, was thought to be involved only with motor movement, that it was the command center for motor movement. But as people began to think more about that idea, they realized, well, motor movement can't happen without the decision of where you want to move. Motor movement can't happen unless you're receiving information from the environment to tell you where you are in 3D space to move. So it became obvious that this was a center where at least the decisions of subconscious movement are made, or they're processed here. And so to whatever extent intuition means a decision made with sparse information, this area of the brain would be the one that would be necessary for it from an evolutionary standpoint, because you want the reflex of, oh my God, something is about to jump out of the bushes and eat me. That can't be a conscious decision. It's got to be an instantaneous one, and that's where the caudate putamen comes in, because that is actually known to be the processing center. So at the same time that Kit Green and Jacques Vallée and others and I were looking at this group of patients that Kit had collected from the intelligence community and the military who'd been supposedly harmed by something, we were looking at the brains, and Kit was doing volumetrics because we'd noticed that there was this dense area that actually wasn't obvious in the literature. I mean, it's there, but the density was higher amongst these individuals. And so it really was Kit, who came to the conclusion that well, these people, the commonality is high functionality, at the very least, intellectual functionality, and that their jobs, the better they were intuitively at accomplishing something, the better would be the outcome. And so this area of the brain became a target of focus for us. And we said, our intuition was, this is where intuition happens. And when you went into the literature, suddenly you find in the medical literature a lot of speculation that this is where intuition happens. Not intuition magic, intuition processing. And it had been shown that, this area lights up when certain intuitive decisions with sparse data are made. So to the extent that we wanted to follow it up properly, we did studies. I did a study with a lab at Harvard, the Modi lab at Harvard, that does work on autism and brain structures. We published 3 papers on this, where we went out and got the MRIs of a few hundred people with different levels of autism, different levels of schizophrenia, and so-called normals. So you have normals, whatever that means, and then you have the neurodivergence on either side, because we felt that, and it had previously been shown by others, that changes to the brain structure in this area were related to things like schizophrenia and autism. So, schizophrenia and autism are kind of perception. I would think of schizophrenia as a perception management issue, whereas, how are you interpreting your world? Whereas autism seems to be about, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, it seems to be about decision-making and focus. And so you would expect a variation in a human population to have this. Actually, I saw a paper recently about how it was saying that autism is the early forms of autism is actually one of the reasons why humanity succeeded, because it gave us certain capabilities and focus. Whereas, on the other side, schizophrenia is about creativity. And so to the extent that those are managed within a population, you as a group have sufficient diversity within to succeed as a tribe, let's say. But of course, there's always the extremes where it goes into pathologies.
So this intuition that you were talking about, it's not necessarily magical.
Right.
It simply has to do with the perhaps an evolutionary advantage that these individuals may have because of their ability to make more acceptable intuitive decisions, or they're just better at it than others are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and but if you then want to ask the question, if you hypothesize that psi exists in whatever form you want to imagine it, remote viewing or telepathy or what have you, you would need to work with this center of the brain, because the information is going to come in, it's going to have to be processed. And, the caudiputamen area of the brain is actually called the brain within the brain. It's where all the decisions are made, and where your executive function says, I want to do this. And then somewhere in your subconscious, but the caudiputamen is deeply involved with it, the ordering of what you should do is all worked out. So evolution almost always works by overlaying function onto previously existing elements, right? You don't invent a whole new area that would be psi. You would use what's already there and try to overlay and augment what's already there with new capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would make sense then that the caudate putamen would be involved. And so when we did all these brain studies, we in fact saw conclusively and statistically that the caudate putamen was certainly involved with intelligence, but it wasn't alone. And even as Kit had begun to do some further work, he'd already said, this was around 2015, 2016, before I got involved with the Modi Lab. He said, look, I'm already beginning to see compensatory changes in some of these individuals, which makes sense that if you have an information processing system in the caudate putamen, which is doing more, well, it can't just do more and keep it there. It has to relay it to other parts of the brain. So there have to be both neural tracts as well as receiving or transmission stations around the rest of the brain that are able to deal with the additional information that, say, the caudate putamen can provide. And in fact, indeed, in our papers, 3 of them, we saw evidence, as Kit had alluded to in his preliminary results, of exactly this compensation, that other areas of the brain would be larger or smaller depending upon the complexity of what we were seeing in the caudate putamen. But overall, the caudate was sort of the principal component number 1 in all of our studies.
Is it
so
possible?
I find that interesting.
Is consciousness taking place in the quantum interactions that are taking place like in the synapses of the brain? I mean, clearly, the atoms that make up our brain, the molecules that make up our brain, they are also, subject to the laws of physics. And so is that where consciousness is taking place? Is somewhere in these quantum interactions, like in the synapses, or what do you...
I mean, if you want to talk about consciousness as a purely material thing that exists within our current known realm, the prevalent hypothesis in the world is that it's happening between the synapses. Now, within a subset of the community, as represented by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, their postulate is that there is insufficient computing capability within even the high complexity of the brain as we understand it. And they, of course, are making certain assumptions about what computation is required to create consciousness.
So they're looking at the brain as like a modulator or a transducer of consciousness, right?
Right. I mean, they postulate that actually at least some of the computation of what we think of as consciousness is happening in the microtubules. And part of the evidence that they have, which is not proof, but it's evidence, that it turns out that several of what we think of as anesthetics, which were thought previously to actually bind in the lipid rafts on the cell membranes, and that was what caused anesthesia and loss of consciousness, in fact, also bind to the microtubules. So that's interesting because, that's what they're saying, look, there's a perhaps causal observation here that, changing the lipid rafts might change membrane potentials. And that's how, let's say, conventional neurophysiologists think about consciousness. It'll make it maybe more squishy or less squishy, and that changes the membrane potentials, as opposed to what Hameroff and Penrose are positing, that at least some of the computation is done on the microtubules. And, as we come to understand microtubules more, there's quite a bit of interaction in the brain and things binding to the microtubules, and they're not just a support structure to keep the cell's shape. So, neither side has the means yet to prove the argument.
Mm-hmm. One last question before we go. I know you have some things that you need to attend to, but I'm interested just to get back to the NHI question, I think you've reached the conclusion that based on your own personal observations, that you think that there is a 100% chance that we're involved with non-human intelligence, and that they may not be really interested in us at all. And so are we merely a passing species on this planet for terms of long-term observation, or is it possible, and getting back to this location in the brain that we were talking about, that there may be certain NHIs that are interested in the lineage of these individuals, and that people who are taken, if you will, sometimes that sort of follows families. Could it be because they're interested in just those individuals, or are they following individuals because there may be either a product that they're getting from them, or that it is necessary to follow a lineage in order to study the effect of the environment on a species? So you start way back when with one individual or with a few individuals, and you follow the lineage of that individual, so you have a baseline to work from to determine how the environment is affecting the organism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to necessarily intervene in, say, the genetics or the reproduction of those individuals to say that you're interested in following them. I mean, I have plants in my greenhouse outside that I've been hybridizing for fun for decades, trying to change and follow them. Whether there's a purposeful need for it, and whether we're a product, I mean, that gets into I think that allows for, unfortunately, the kind of hyperbole that people want to use to scare the bejesus. Those are campfire ghost stories, mm-hmm. and maybe they're real. I mean, I never discount what people say that they experience. I mean, I experienced, as many people know, as I've talked about openly, what appeared to be little guys in my bedroom as a kid. Was it a dream? I don't know. But it was, in accordance with what other people have been talking about for decades as well. So, I had no idea what grays were. And it wasn't until I saw Whitley Strieber's book on the cover sometime in my 20s that the whole memory of those days came back to me. And so, but I also want to correct something about where I say that there's a 100% chance.
Yeah.
Is 100% chance doesn't mean that I'm saying it is. I'm saying, from a statistical standpoint, it could be up to 100%, and I have no problem believing that it would be true. So there's a subtlety there that, of course, was missed by all the newspapers that reported it around the world, that Stanford professors say they're 100% here.
Yeah.
It's funny, I tell a story.
I understand the distinction.
A student of mine, Chinese from Beijing, his parents were also scientists, really one of my best students ever. And at his graduation, his parents came all the way from Beijing. This was just a couple of years ago. And his mother wanted a picture with me. And I said, that's nice, sure. Let's get a picture. You're all in your academic regalia. And she turned and said, yeah, I really want to show all my friends that I was with the Stanford professor who said aliens are here. I'm like, oh, great. You didn't want the picture because I spent 6 years teaching your son. You wanted the picture because you wanted to tell your friends that, you spoke to the Stanford professor.
Got your picture with the alien guy.
Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. That's okay. Well, I'm sure she was also interested in how, actually, to be fair, with my students, I feel that they teach me as much as I teach them. It's something done together, and I really have to run. I'm sorry.
I understand, Dr. Nolan, and I appreciate it. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here. And I'll be back in just a few moments with some afterthoughts.
The Soul Foundation is an institute of research that funds and guides research in sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, and that also produces policy and advisory research that is aimed to illumine and help us clear up what's going on with the UAP issue and also prepare us to deal with the social implications of it.
I come from a tradition in science of taking from multiple different fields of science and thought simultaneously and synthesizing them into something new. You create and you invent. I'm a tinkerer by nature, and so here we are tinkering with the reality of what this might actually mean.
We also are putting together what we call a whole of society approach that engages all institutions and kinds of people so that we can deal with what may promise to be a very world-changing issue in a way that involves everyone.
Here you now have everybody realizing that it's possible to talk about this and that they're not going to be booed out of the room.
When history looks back on this age, it will see two kinds of scientists: those who defended the borders of what was known, and those who walked straight into the darkness. Dr. Garry Nolan belongs to the latter. He came from a world of precision, microscopes, gene sequencing, the immune system's hidden wars. Yet he dared to apply the same rigor to questions most institutions still fear to ask. What began as a boy's quiet encounter on a newspaper route became a lifelong pursuit of the forbidden frontier, the study of non-human intelligence and its intersection with human consciousness itself. Nolan's path embodies the next phase of scientific evolution, curiosity without dogma. His work, bridging molecular biology and the philosophy of mind, shows us that discovery begins where certainty ends. It was in that liminal space that the Soul Foundation was born, a consortium of scientists, philosophers, and policymakers determined to study UAP and consciousness with the same seriousness once reserved for particle physics or cosmology. But Soul is more than a think tank. It is a declaration that inquiry itself must be free, a new kind of science, unafraid of mystery, willing to build bridges between government secrecy and open knowledge. In the quiet corridors of academia, in the encrypted chatter of defense networks, and in the imaginations of those who still dare to look up Soul's presence, signals that the conversation has finally begun. As Dr. Nolan reminds us, the universe is a vast computation, an unfolding code written in hydrogen, carbon, and curiosity. The question is no longer whether we are alone, but whether we are ready to meet what waits for us inside the equations. And when that day comes, when the first undeniable proof stands before us, history will trace the moment of reckoning to those who refused to turn away from the impossible, to the scientists who saw the truth not as property, but as responsibility, to the visionaries who built institutions like the Soul Foundation where courage and intellect converge. Because science without courage is silence, and silence in a universe this alive is the one thing humanity can no longer afford. Thank you to Dr. Garry Nolan, and thank you for joining us once again. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time, right here on the official MUFON podcast.